Good morning, everybody. Welcome to week 2. How's everybody doing today? How was your first week?
Doing good.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's good. You guys are kind of like the experts at this point since everybody else started yesterday. We're going to start on Blackboard today, so if you haven't accessed the new module in Blackboard, then you're going to want to bring that up for today. And we're missing a few people, but I'm sure they'll join us as we go. So let's get a start. I like to try to finish, like about an hour instead of an hour and 15 minutes into class. I'm trying to give you a little bit of time between the classes because I think it's a little short, the 15 minutes. Maybe that's just me. But anyway, I want to make sure that everybody's on week 2. If you go over here to weekly modules in your Blackboard, week 2 should appear here for you, so you can click on that. And this week we'll begin short fiction. So the notes that you did for today and all of the readings that you did were really just the kickoff for our short fiction. And this week we're focusing on plot. You should have read in the textbook about plot and made some notes. The objectives are twofold: to analyze for plot elements, and also this week we'll be investigating literary periods and movements. There's an assignment that you will start this week that deals with that. So if you scroll down to where it says learning activities and assignments, you'll see that I broke it up just like last week into different due dates. Can you give me some feedback on that? Does that work for you? Does it not work for you? What are your thoughts on that structure?
I like how you have all due dates there already with everything.
Okay. I'm
That
thinking that
was
it's
good.
easy then to transfer it to your planner or whatever you're using to organize yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my thought on it. So I'm, if there's some way I can tweak that it would be more useful to you, then you can let me know. I highly recommend Google Calendar, by the way. If you don't use Google Calendar, the benefits of Google Calendar are that you can import all of your Google Classroom assignments. There aren't very many for this class, but if you have other classes that use Google Classroom, then you can import them automatically into your calendar with the due dates. And you can also automatically import all of your Zoom calls so that the links are right there on the days. And then you can set it up. So you might want to investigate that if you don't have a system that works for you. If you have a system, I say keep going with your system. But I noticed that most of you have your names there for your avatar. I would like for you, for next time, to at least put a picture. If you're not going to do the live camera thing, I get it. I don't always like to do that either, although I do when I'm teaching because it's sort of necessary. But I get it. But would you please choose a picture of yourself and put it up there for next time? I don't think you can do it while you're in a meeting, but if you put it up there, it will always be there whenever your video's not showing. I need to start to learn who you are. I don't want to come to face in a month or two and be like, yeah, I know, it's a hair issue. Believe me, I know about hair issues, but you don't have to do that. I'm sensitive to that too, but you can put a picture up instead of a video, and then whenever you're off screen, your picture will be there. I'll know who you are. I don't want to get to class and be like, you have a big G on your face instead of who you are. So okay, wait, some people are joining us. Let's see. Okay, make sure everybody's in here. All right. All right, so the next thing on the list here is just a reminder that you need to do your formative question for today. Today's question has some background for the story that you read for today called Snow by Julia Alvarez. And there's a couple videos that I want you to watch on that formative about where she's talking about her life. They're real short, they're like just a couple minutes. And then the question has to do with how do you think that her life experiences might have informed her story and the character Yolanda that we read in that story. So do make sure that you do your formative sometime today before 11:55. And then there's another one on Thursday, but you can see I put that down here on the Thursday due date spot, just to remind you. There are a few things that you should have already turned in by now. So if you're behind in that, you need to communicate with me about what's going on. One is the summer assignment, which should have been turned in on Google. I know that it's going to be a little weird. Some things get turned in on Google and some things on Blackboard. It's because the department chair at STC has told me there's certain things they do not want to see on Blackboard. So the things that are for STC we'll put on Blackboard, and the things that are only graded for East will be on Google. But I'll usually put it in parentheses there so that you know where to look. So that should already be done. Also, at this point, you should have completed your academic integrity quiz. That one was due on Sunday. So it's closed now. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, if you didn't get to it, it slipped your mind, whatever, drop me an email, communicate with me, let me know what's going on, and I'll give you some options. You should have also completed your slide for the class sort of introduction slideshow that we've got going on, and commented on some other slides. I was kind of monitoring those over the week, and I thought, it's kind of cool that y'all are learning things about each other, even though you've probably been in class together before. I think it's kind of good that you're starting, like, you play the piano? What? It's kind of cool to see you reacting to each other like that. So we'll go over that. We'll take a look at it again in just a few minutes. And then last week, you also should have completed your Tuesday and Thursday formatives. This is how I'm taking attendance. So last week, I touched base with everybody who had issues with formative, and this week everybody should be on track for completing those. So just make a note to yourself that on B days, you just need to get in there sometime during the day and answer the question that's there. I'm giving feedback on those. Whenever you go to formative, I think there's a spot at the top where you can click and it will inform you that there's some feedback on your previous formative. So I'm going in, I'm reading them, I'm responding to them and interacting with you. So you might want to read the comments and stuff. Okay, so if any of those things you're having issues with or something happened, just communicate with me and I'll see what we can do. All right, so for today, I want to go through the syllabus and talk about the things that you read for today. And I want to also go through the textbook material on plot and do an example of how we analyze for plot. And then I'll go through the stuff for this week. So first things first, if you click here on syllabus, you should have read through the syllabus or at least watched the video and kind of scrolled through the syllabus. These things get really long from the college because they have so much stuff they want to tell you. But I wanted to make an opportunity in class today to answer any questions that you might have had about the syllabus. So is there anything in the syllabus that you'd like for me to discuss in more depth or go over or give you more detail about? You can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask me. It's called wait time. The teacher thing. Okay, I just felt like that would be a more effective way to go through the syllabus with you. I'm required to go through the syllabus, but I just thought it'd be easier to do it with a video. And so hopefully you watch that and we can move past that monster. I also asked you to look at a document called Interrogating Texts. And the reason that I had you look at this one is because I think it gives a lot of good practical advice about reading. One of the things that I notice in this class and also in my AP class is that sometimes what the teacher means by read and what the students mean by read are different things. And hopefully the summer book helped you kind of put that into perspective a little bit. But sometimes the students, when teachers say read, it's like, okay, my eyes passed over that material, I read it. But when instructors say read it, we mean read it, learn it, understand it, be able to recall it, ask questions about it, really deal with the reading assignment. So I feel like this handout, it happens to be from Harvard. So I guess if it's good enough for Harvard, it's good enough for us, right? It runs you through some things to be thinking about, some techniques. If you ever find yourself in a situation where, I read it, but I didn't pass the quiz, or I thought I understood that, but then something happened on the test, it might be depth of reading. And so this handout helps you to really go through and think about your reading assignments and get enough depth that we're talking about at the college level. So it's important that you have a method. You don't have to use these specific methods, but sometimes I have students who come to me and they're like, they don't have a method for reading, and they just sat down, their eyes went over it, they kind of thought about it for a second, and then, okay, I read that, close the book and go and put it away. So when we're talking about reading, we're looking for more depth and for the things that we read this summer. So that's the reason that I put this on here, is just to give you some ideas of what to do in your mind while you're reading, right? What good readers do. And it will also help you with retention and help you remember what you read. So likewise, not just in literature class, in history class, you have to read a chapter or 3 chapters of a textbook. How do you remember what you read? There's some tips here that can help you with that too. So any questions on this handout? It's more of a tool than anything else to help you. Okay, let's go to the slideshow then. I want to take a minute because people have been commenting on your slides. I don't know if you knew that. Because I'm the owner of the slideshow, you probably didn't get notified when people made comments. So I thought maybe we would take a minute to get back into the slideshow, and you can go to your slide and see what everybody thought about it. I think people were pretty creative with their slideshows and sharing, and I really enjoyed the multimedia part of it. I got to hear people, singing. I don't know if there's anybody singing in this class. I got to hear people singing and showing their favorite music videos and all that stuff. I think that's pretty cool. So take a minute and go to your slide and make sure that you can read the comments that your classmates made for you. I'm just going to shuffle through them while I give you a few minutes to go and look. You can see the other slides that got finished since yours got finished. I have to say this really helped me get to see like who's who, because everybody had pictures of themselves on there. So now I can start to formulate a picture in my mind of the class. Sean apparently either looks like Derek Jeter or Michael Jordan, or a donut. Is there anybody who wants to say something about their slide? I'm not going to make you, but if you wanted to. Hopefully you had fun making them. I think it's a little better than stand up in front of the class and tell us about yourself. um, Plus, visual is always has more depth than just speaking. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed getting feedback from your classmates too. Let's switch back over to today's list here and start focusing on our reading for today. So from your textbook, you should have read through plot, the chapter on plot, and made some notes. I think a lot of times, especially as we go through this semester is called Forms of Literature. And so a lot of times the things that we talk about are not new topics. I know that you've studied plot before, the teacher's been talking about it for a long time. What we're going to talk about today is how do we analyze for plot? How do we say something about the plot of a story? And how do we notice things like that? So I don't think very many of these terms in these chapters are going to be brand new to you, maybe a couple here or there, but I'm not expecting that it's new information. But I do want you to make sure that you have notes on them. And then when you come to class after having read it, I'll go through the chapter with you. I'll point out some important points and I'll probably deepen your understanding of those terms. And then we'll move on to another term. But this week we're reading about plot. And I like the way the text puts it. They say plot is more than what happens. It is how what happens is revealed. In other words, what choices did the author make when they were revealing it? The author really manipulates your reading of a text, just like a director manipulates how you view a film. So an author can choose to keep you in the dark about something or bring something to light. And we talk about all those things when we're talking about plot. Conflict is central to plot. I mean, who wants to read a story that doesn't have a conflict? It would be a very boring story. Some people sat on a couch. Oh, okay, nothing happened. Oh, fantastic. You don't go to the movies and, nothing happens. Nobody wants to watch that movie. Everybody wants to see the drama or the car crash or whatever. Somebody bleeding out on a sidewalk. Everybody wants to see that. So, well, not literally, but, like in a movie. So the idea is that we have to have a conflict. And there are many types of conflict: person versus person, person versus self, person versus nature, all of those things. But conflict is central. They also talk about protagonist and antagonist in this section. And I want to stop and talk about that a little bit. Look at the notes that you made for those and maybe add to them a little bit. Sometimes when you're younger and we first start talking about protagonist, we tend to teach that the protagonist is the good guy and the antagonist is the bad guy. And there's some problems with that, right? For example, what if my protagonist is a murderer with a heart of gold or something, right? What if my murderer killed 17 people, but he drives the action of the story? He's still my protagonist. So we need to shift away from good and bad, because you're probably old enough to realize that most people fit in a gray area, right? Nobody's 100% good or 100% bad. Everybody's kind of on a continuum in between. So when we talk about protagonist, we say it's the principal character. It's the character that drives the action. That's how you determine the protagonist. They might not be a good person, but if they drive the action, if it's the main character, then they're still the protagonist. Now, an antagonist is any person or thing or entity that gets in the way of the protagonist. So it could be another person. It could be an emotion, right? Like fear can get in the way of a protagonist. Love can get in the way of a protagonist and, shade their view of life. Weather can get in the way of a protagonist. Somebody was trying to climb the mountain, but a terrible snowstorm came in. So anything that is in the way of the protagonist's goal, whatever that is the antagonist. And there are usually multiple antagonists. Can a character be their own antagonist? What do y'all think? Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm my worst enemy when I double think things or I make a decision and I'm like, I don't want to do that. So mentally, you can be your own antagonist. And for that reason, we have internal conflict, right? We're going to talk about that in a minute. So protagonists can have multiple types of conflict. There could be multiple conflicts in a story. Even a story as short as Snow or the story of an hour has multiple conflicts going on. All right. The next section was stages of plot. I'm sure that these are not new to you either, except maybe crisis. Crisis might be a term that is new to you. I thought that instead of going through the text here that I would do a diagram for you. So are you ready? I'm going to get fancy. Gonna get fancy. Ooh, document camera time. Oh, I hope it focuses. There we go. All right, so when we talk about plot, we use a diagram often called, you can see that, right? Freytag's pyramid. So I want you to have notes on this. This is how you spell Freytag. He was a literary theorist, dramatist. You've seen Freytag's pyramid before. You maybe just didn't know that it was called that. It looks like this. Right. Super familiar. Whenever we're talking about plot, we talk about the 5 stages, right? The exposition. This is all review probably. The rising action. That's the conflict stage, right? Where the conflicts intensify. We have the climax, that's stage 3. The book talks about crisis, which doesn't always happen, but if it does, it would be like right before the climax. I'll go into that in a second. And then stage 4 is, of course, falling action. And stage 5 is the resolution. In the text, they say you can also use the French term denouement if you wanted to be Frenchy French and super highfalutin. I do not, so I will usually say resolution. But if you ever needed to impress people or something. Now let's talk about these stages and what is supposed to happen in each one, because I want you to be able to, given any story, identify the parts of plot and write about them and how they influence each other. So that's how I will test you, actually. I'll give you a new story that we have never discussed and ask you, how does the conflict develop in the story? Or how does the conflict lead to the crisis and the climax of the story? So I want to do a little bit of practice on that by using the story Snow that you read for today. So in the story Snow, we have the character Yolanda, right? And in the exposition, this is where we, it's sort of like we learn the basics. We learn the characters, the setting, the basic problem, right? In this story, I'm gonna put Snow up here. So later in your notes, you remember what we were doing. In this story, we find out that there is a young girl called Yolanda. And she is our narrator. We know that Yolanda is new to New York City. She's an elementary school student, right? So she's young. I think it's like 4th grade, 4th or 5th grade, something like that. She has immigrated to New York City. So she's not originally from New York City, and that's important to the story later on. And she's our narrator. It's a first-person narrator. In terms of setting, we also know that this is taking place during a very specific time in American history, because they talk about President Kennedy, right? President Kennedy dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if you know your US history, you know that that's early 1960s. So in the exposition, I get this mindset. I'm going to know that there's certain things that people were thinking about at the time that we don't think about anymore, certain situations that we don't think about anymore. We're in a different environment here in 2020, but I have to put myself into the position of the story because that's the setting. So once I have that figured out, I think, okay, well, I have to start thinking about the conflict that arises. Yolanda's got two issues. One is that she is like new to her environment. Oh, you know what else? She's at a Catholic school, right? She's got her teacher is a nun. Imagine that, right? I went to Catholic school, so I don't have to imagine. I'll tell you those stories someday. Still healing. Just kidding. All right, so one of her conflicts is that she's in a new environment. Is that an internal conflict or an external conflict or both?
Would it be external?
Okay, why?
Because it's changing around her and she's not the one changing. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. The fact that she's in a new environment means she needs to adapt, right? And that's an external conflict. I have to deal with new sights and sounds and food and people and all that stuff. But do you think that that could cause an internal conflict? What do y'all
Yes.
think? Yeah, for sure. Problems in your environment can cause internal problems, right? Like if my parents are always arguing, that can cause a problem in my own mind, right? Like anxiety. Or if something happens outside of me in my environment, like COVID, it can cause an internal conflict like feelings of isolation. So we have to remember that there can be an interchange between, internal conflict can cause an external conflict. If I'm depressed, I might lash out at people or be isolated, right? So these types of conflicts can interact. An external conflict can cause an internal conflict also. So when we think about conflict, it's not as simple as saying, oh, it's person versus person or it's person versus environment. We have to think about the interplay between those types of conflicts. All right, so she's in a new environment. That's one conflict. There's another one that's happening at the nation level, right? There's impending war. They're getting the school children ready for the fact that they might have to have like a bomb raid, like an air raid siren go off, and they have to get under their desks and they have to deal with the fallout of a nuclear weapon. So she's got these two things going on. That is probably mainly an external conflict, right? In the story. I mean, how does a kid who's 9 years old deal with the idea of impending war? It's probably too big for her, but it is a conflict in the story. All right, when we talk about climax, sometimes people think of it as the most emotional part of a story, and it sometimes is, but that's not a good way to identify it, because oftentimes the ending of a story is more emotional. So the way to think about climax and how to identify it is to say, where do we deal with the conflict? Where is the conflict dealt with? I'm going to say, where is the conflict dealt with? It may not be solved. But what happens in snow is one day it's the winter and it starts to snow and Yolanda doesn't know what's happening and she immediately thinks, oh, it's the bomb, right? The bomb has gone off and we're all doomed. It's happening, it's happening. And she sort of freaks out over the snowflakes, right? Mistakes, the snow for bomb fallout. It's an M. Well, she's never experienced snow before, so she, just associates whatever's happening with what she's been told, and she's been told that they're going to have this war and we could have this fallout. So she jumps to that conclusion. She sort of freaks out. Now, crisis, I do want to deal with crisis right here because the text talks about it. We don't have a crisis in every story, but when we do, we want to kind of look at its interplay with the climax. The crisis is an event that causes the climax. So sometimes the climax just happens, right? Other times there's a precipitating event that causes that to happen. In this case, it would be the snow. The snow falls and it causes Yolanda's freak out about what's happening in the air, right? Not every story has a crisis, but if there is one, you should, kind of think about how does it cause that climax to occur? How does it force it? All right, so Yolanda has this confusing moment. The falling action is always the consequences of the climax. So because this happened in the climax, what is the result of that? And that's the falling action. In Snow, what happens is the nun, Sister Zoe, has to go and kind of like comfort her and say, no, no, it's not the bomb. Don't worry, it's just snow. So Sister Zoe tells Yolanda that it's snow. She wouldn't have had to do that if Yolanda hadn't freaked out about it in the first place. So this is a direct consequence of this event. All right, resolution is kind of like the final thought or moment, like image or moment. It's usually just the very tail end of a story. In fact, the way that this gets represented in this mountain kind of format isn't really very accurate. What usually happens in a story is something more like this. There's a long exposition about the setting and all the people, and then there's this long time of setup, the climax, falling action, resolution. It's pretty much how it goes. Usually, this makes it seem like the climax is going to happen in the middle of a story, but usually it's toward the end. The exciting part of any narrative is the buildup to that climactic moment. So really, if we were going to draw it out, actually, it would probably look more like this one down here. But it's hard to put notes on it. So I guess we make it like that so we have room to make our notes. In this story, as soon as Yolanda calms down because she realizes that it's snow, we have this moment where the nun talks about snowflakes, and she talks about how they're all individual, right? And there's the idea that really snow and fallout are opposites. You wouldn't look at pieces of ash that are coming from a nuclear explosion and say, oh, they're all beautiful and individual, just like a people. So in that way, snow and fallout are opposite. Snow is natural, fallout is man-made. And so the nun kind of focuses on this element, right? This natural element. We also get a sense at the end about vulnerability. We're all vulnerable to the snow. We're also vulnerable to these nuclear situations that are happening beyond our control. And that goes back to the conflict that was presented way back in the Rising Action, right? Yolanda's vulnerable because of the war, like everybody in the country was at that time, but she's also vulnerable because of her new environment and her new situation and trying to understand, her new circumstances. So in the resolution, sometimes I can get a key to understanding the depth of the story. I can get a person versus person conflict at the end, the war. I can also get a person versus self because Yolanda has to understand about her new environment, and that's going to take some adjustment, right? So the idea is that by the time you get to the resolution, you should be having some deeper insights about the story itself. It's not just about saying, oh, let me label these elements. It's about me discovering more depth as the story's plot progresses, right? And hopefully going through this process. Now, are you going to write this out for every story you read? Well, you could. I don't know if you want to do that, but it would be good practice to start thinking about how all these elements, interact with one another. That would be good. You could go into Story of an Hour and try to figure out the plot structure. Is there a crisis in Story of an Hour or not? If so, what is its impact on the climax? What are the consequences of events after that climax? In that story, the climax is when Mrs. Mallard walks out of the room feeling free, right? She finally feels her freedom. I'm just giving you a little tip in case you decide to do that practice. I'm not going to assign you to do that, but. All right, so questions on Freytag's pyramid, how it can help us analyze. All right, if you don't write it out, at least you should be thinking about these things. We have 2 longer stories this week, which I'll talk about in a minute, but you can probably keep those things in mind. All right, so I think I went through the stages of plot section pretty thoroughly. And the last section here is order and sequence that you read for today. This is where they talk about flashback and foreshadowing. And they do a good job of explaining that. I don't think that's a new concept for you either, but I want to make sure that you think about flashback and foreshadowing and really all these literary terms as tools for the author. A lot of times people will come into class and they'll be like, oh, the reason there's a flashback is to make it more interesting. The reason there's a metaphor or there's a reason that this imagery is here is because the author wanted to make it more appealing. That is not why authors put things into their works. So that answer is got to be out the window. What's the reason that an author puts in a flashback? Usually to fill in information, to fill in a blank. So if you don't have that in your notes, go ahead and put that in where you made your notes from the text about flashback. Usually an author will use flashback to explain something that's happening in the present time. So why is so-and-so so angry? I don't know. For the first 3 pages of this novel, he's angry. I don't know why until they do a flashback explaining that he was abused as a child, right? So the flashback is filling in a blank, and that's the purpose for that. An author may keep something kind of a mystery until that flashback goes in and fills in information about what happened in the course of the story. So flashback has a specific purpose. Same thing foreshadowing. The tricky thing about foreshadowing is you don't know that it's foreshadowing until you're done reading the story. For example, in Story of an Hour, in the very first sentence or 2, we find out that Mrs. Mallard has a heart condition, and everybody is very thinks of her as fragile, and they're very careful in explaining that her husband died because they're afraid of her heart condition. And that doesn't mean much to us until later in the story when she dies from it. So foreshadowing is something that we can only see at the end of the story. We go back and we say, oh, you know what? They did say at the beginning that she had a heart condition and she should be treated, sort of delicately because of that. Foreshadowing is usually a function of suspense. So an author doesn't put foreshadowing in just to spice up his writing. An author puts foreshadowing in because they want to give you a sense of suspense for what's coming up later, right? So the fact that she has a heart condition is something that you kind of have in the back of your mind through the whole story, especially the way that her sister treats her and some of the other characters treat her, Mrs. Mallard. And then, boom, she has a heart attack at the end because finally the shock of seeing her husband actually come home overwhelms her and her heart can't take it, right? So just keep in mind that there are deeper reasons why authors use these. And if you give me some sort of, superficial thing like the author just wanted to make you more excited, that's not a good reason to put these things in. There's usually a deeper reason for that. So there's a few little tips there. The book does also have this little checklist thing, which I think is handy just for thinking about elements of plot. There's one for every one of these topics. Okay, is there anything else that from the reading that you had to do, the notes that you want me to go over? I feel like I went through that chapter. No, everybody's good? All right, so I also talked about Freytag's pyramid, and I related those plot elements to the 2 stories from our reading. So you should have notes on how plot elements work in mainly Snow, but I mentioned a few things from Story of an Hour. So if you wanted to practice that for yourself, you could draw yourself out a pyramid and try to work out Story of an Hour and say, all right, well, I already gave the climax. So you could work, back the other way on those. All right, let's talk about what's coming up for assignments for this week, and then we'll be finished for today. All right, so there is an assignment that I put it on Sunday, but really it's not going to be due till the end of the semester. And if you click on here, it will explain why. So let me minimize this. All right, so if you click on the literary periods and movements, there are certain literary periods and movements that you have to know about for this course. And since we're working on fiction right now, there are 3 that you need to know for fiction. So this assignment is an ongoing thing. When we get to poetry in a few weeks, we'll be adding these movements and periods. When we get to drama toward the end of the semester, we'll be adding these. So we need to start making a timeline. Let's look at the task up here. It says create an electronic or handwritten timeline. You can just do it in your notes if you want, or I did put a couple of resources down here that could help you make an online one if you wanted to, or use whatever tool you know about that would help you. And for each one of these 3 movements in literature, in fiction, I want for you to identify the date of the period and movement. It's usually a span of years. The basic qualities of that movement, examples of titles from that movement, and writers from that movement. We only have 3. You're not going to go ahead and do poetry until we get to the poetry unit in a few weeks. So the book does have information about those movements on these pages here. So you can use the book to make your timeline and then put them in the right time periods, right? You know, like one of them is in the 1950s, then you'll want to orient that on your timeline and then give information about that movement so that you can tell me what's the difference between realism and modernism and postmodernism. So instead of assigning this all at the end when our papers are coming in and we're getting ready for semester exam, I felt like it would be easier to do it in bite-sized pieces as we go through the literature. So spend some time this week learning about realism, modernism, and postmodernism and starting to create your timeline for that. But you don't have to turn anything in on Sunday. Maybe I'll add a note here just so that people aren't confused. You don't have to turn anything in because we're going to be continually developing that timeline as time goes on. Questions about that one?
So we just work on the realism, modernism, and the other one?
Right, postmodernism, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, find out what they are, find out what their time frames are, who are some key writers from those time periods, what are some of the works from those movements, and then put it away for when we do poetry. I'll make another assignment where you have to add the poetry ones that are down here.
Listen, are we creating a new paper, or are we just writing under those?
You can do it. You can make a copy of this if you want to, but it's going to be a timeline of, you know, like from the late 1800s to modern day, and you're going to have to put them in time order. So you can either do that electronically or you can handwrite it. Either way, if this helps you, do it, but I don't think they're going to fit, because what's going to happen is on a timeline, you're going to have realism overlapping with Harlem Renaissance down here. Do you know what I mean? When you get another one on there. So you want to make sure that you can adjust it later, whatever way you do it. If you want to download this document and manipulate it, you're free to do that. Hopefully that answers your question. Anything else about this one? Okay. Then down here, you'll see that I've got 2 more chapters for you to read, one on character and one on setting. I put the PDF of them here, the PDFs. Don't know that I'm going to continue doing that. Hopefully everybody has their textbook at this point and they can just go to their textbook for that. But I also want for you to read 2 stories. These stories are much longer than the ones I kind of gave you a break last week with those little tiny short stories. This week, the stories are much longer. They're more interesting and obviously have deeper plot elements and so on going on because they're longer and more developed. But you're going to read Battle Royal by Ralph Ellison. That's in your textbook. Also, I linked it here. It's not a PDF, but it's an online read. So in case you're working on getting your book, you still have access to that text. And then 56 to 0 by T.C. Boyle. With those 2 stories, they're all, I don't know, like 10 pages long, so pace yourself. I want you to be thinking about plot because we just went through plot, but also next week you're working on character and setting. So when you're reading those two stories, I want you to be using what you've read from the textbook about setting, plot, character, to think about those texts. And next week I'll go through character and setting using those stories. So if you don't know those stories, it'd be hard for you to follow the conversation. I might put you in some groups next week, in some breakout rooms to discuss plot, setting, and character in those stories. So you don't want to show up in a group and not be prepared. So make sure that you're up to speed with your reading on those. Do your formative today and also on Thursday. What else? How's it going with that online training thing from STC? Did anybody complete that already?
What online training thing?
There's an online training that you have to complete by, I think it's the 9th of September for STC. Chat. It should show up in your, where all your courses are. It's like a Blackboard online thing.
The orientation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's hard. You just have to complete it. I don't want you to like find out STC is gonna do something to you because you didn't do that orientation. So I'm just reminding you. It's like, I don't know, 5 modules. I don't think it's, if you're already navigating Blackboard, I don't think it's gonna be very hard for you to do it. But I just wanted to remind you that the deadline was supposed to be last Friday, but they extended it to, I think, is it next Friday? I think so. Anyway, just a reminder on that.
Yeah, I already did it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, if you did it, then don't worry about it. But I just wanted to bring it up in case it would help you to be reminded. Yeah, I don't think it's going to take long. All right. Any questions about the material for next week before I end the meeting? Any other questions? Things I might be able to answer or find out from you, for you, I mean.
Miss, I have a question.
Sure.
When are we going back to school?
Right now, the date to go back to school, if you choose to, is September 27th or 28th. I have a feeling that the district may file a 4-week extension on that, but it depends on the situation with the virus when we get to that date. So it's either going to be the end of September or the end of October, but you will not go back to school in the way that we were back at school last year. It's not going to be a traditional schedule. You'll have the option to continue virtually. You can continue on by 6 weeks at home the way that you've been doing it, or you can go on a hybrid schedule. So the schedule will change whenever we go to that, whether it's the end of September or the end of October. So hybrid means you're at home sometimes working and at school sometimes working with your teacher in your classroom. So I might see some of you in person as soon as September 27th. But if the district doesn't feel like it's safe, then they will petition the state for a 4-week extension. You know, the Valley's a hot spot for COVID. So if that doesn't clear up by the end of September, they might extend it, and we'll be doing this into October. Matter of fact, Dr. Canales, the superintendent, popped into one of my classes yesterday, and she mentioned that exact thing, saying that there's a possibility that we might stay virtual till the end of October. She didn't say one way or the other because they don't know yet, but yeah, at least until September 27th, we'll be doing this. Making the best of it, right? Other questions, things that you've been wondering about and needed a chance to ask one of the grown-ups from school about it? If I don't know, I'll find out for you. No? Okay, well, just a reminder that I'm available every day, 2:45 to 4. I'm expecting that people will contact me. You have my Google voice number, you can email me, whatever might be going on, especially if you missed one of the assignments from the last week. Definitely communicate with me about that, because if you wait more than a couple more days, I'm not gonna have time for that. So if you miss something, and we'll chalk it up to everything's kind of confusing right now, and I'll give you some options. But if you let it go for another week or so, then I'm just going to say, I should have figured that out. But contact me and I'll work with you. All right. All right, I'm going to close the meeting then. It was good to see all of you today. I'll see you next Tuesday, same time, same station, right? Have a good week.